Right now, as you watch this video, 21 million barrels of oil per day are moving through a narrow waterway, just 33 kilometers wide, a corridor so fragile that a single disruption could send global energy prices up by 30% in under 72 hours, according to Goldman Sachs projections released March 2026. At 02:17 a.m. Gulf Standard Time, satellite imagery confirmed increased Iranian naval movement near the strait. At 06:40 a.m., Lloyd's List intelligence flagged elevated maritime risk levels. By 09 a.m., insurance premiums for oil tankers in the region had already begun rising. Not a war, not a blockade, but something far more dangerous: leverage. Because this is the part almost nobody wants to say out loud. The most powerful navy in human history is currently positioned inside a geography that can turn its strength into a liability. No explosions yet, no missiles fired, just ships, waiting, watching, and silence. Three different silences, in fact. The silence of oil traders who stopped placing long-term bets, the silence of insurers rewriting risk models overnight, and the silence of governments who understand exactly what happens if Hormuz closes and are hoping they never have to say it publicly. This is not about what Iran can do. It is about what the system cannot survive. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Here is the thesis in one sentence. The United States is not at risk of losing the Strait of Hormuz because of Iranian strength. It is at risk because its own dominance has created a system that cannot tolerate disruption. That is the inversion. That is the part almost no outlet is willing to frame this way. Because what you are watching right now is not a traditional military standoff. It is a structural stress test of a global system built on assumptions. Assumptions about uninterrupted flow, about deterrence, about control. And in the next few minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly how this situation reached this point, and more importantly, what happens next if even a small part of that system breaks. We are going to cover two very specific things. First, the exact sequence of events, with dates, numbers, and named sources, that turned Hormuz into the most dangerous choke point on Earth this week. Second, the two paths forward from here, one that stabilizes the situation and one that slowly, almost invisibly, spirals into something far more dangerous. If you want to stay ahead of this story, not 48 hours behind it, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next 72 hours of this situation are going to move fast, faster than most people are prepared for. Let us go back to Sunday, March 31st, 2026, 11:42 p.m. local time, Tehran. The city was quiet, not tense, not mobilized, just normal. Late-night traffic moved slowly along Valley SR Street. Cafes were still open, phones glowing, conversations low, no sirens, no urgency, no indication that anything irreversible was about to begin. And out in the Gulf, nothing unusual on the surface. Commercial tankers continued their transit, GPS signals steady, shipping lanes open. This is what normal looked like. Then, at 11:47 p.m., a statement was released by Iran's Supreme National Security Council. 5 paragraphs, just under 600 words, one page, just one page. Inside it was a phrase that changed the temperature of the entire global economy. All options remain on the table regarding the Strait of Hormuz. Stop. Read that again. Because according to Reuters, April 1st, 2026, 02:10 a.m. GMT, within 18 minutes of that statement, crude oil futures jumped $4.70 per barrel in overnight trading. By the opening bell in Asia, prices were up 9.2%. By the end of the trading day, global energy markets had absorbed a paper shock of $120 billion in valuation shifts, according to Bloomberg terminal data. This was not a missile. This was not a naval engagement. This was a sentence. And the system reacted instantly, because the Strait of Hormuz is not just a shipping lane. It is the circulatory system of the global economy. Roughly 21 million barrels per day flow through it. That is over 20% of global petroleum consumption, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, EIA 2025 report. Liquefied natural gas shipments from Qatar, over $30 billion annually, pass through the same corridor, per International Energy Agency, IEA, estimates. For years, dry timber had been stacking, sanctions tightening, proxy conflicts expanding. naval encounters increasing, over 17 reported close contact incidents in 2025 alone, according to U.S. Navy Fifth Fleet briefings. All of it building pressure, and then one sentence: no missiles, no alarms, just markets moving, ships slowing, governments calculating, engines on, weapons ready, waiting, received. Revelation number 1. This is not a naval standoff in the traditional sense. It is a geometry problem, and the geometry favors disruption. At its narrowest point, the Strait of Hormuz is 33 kilometers wide, but the actual shipping lanes, just 3 kilometers in each direction, separated by a 2-kilometer buffer zone, according to the International Maritime Organization, IMO. 3 kilometers. That is the entire margin through which $1.2 billion worth of oil moves every single hour, based on EIA flow data and Brent pricing averages from Q1 2026. Now place inside that corridor fast attack craft, shore-based anti-ship missiles, naval mines, drones, and then ask a different question. Not, can the U.S. Navy win a war here? But, can it guarantee uninterrupted flow? Because those are not the same thing. According to the Pentagon's 2025 Maritime Security Report, Iran possesses over 3,000 naval mines, including Chinese-designed influence mines capable of targeting specific vessel signatures. Clearing just 1 square nautical mile of mined water can take up to 20 hours, according to U.S. Navy Mine Countermeasures Command. Now scale that. Now compress it into a choke point. Dollar for dollar, the asymmetry becomes clear. A single naval mine costing $10,000 to $50,000 can disable or sink a tanker valued at $100 million, carrying cargo worth $70 million. That is a $50,000 disruption, triggering a $170 million loss. Read that again. And it gets worse. Iran's anti-ship missile systems, including variants of the Noor and Khalij FARs, have ranges between 120 and 300 kilometers, allowing them to cover the entire strait from inland positions, according to CSIS Missile Defense Project and Jane's Defense Weekly, meaning the threat does not need to leave land, it just needs to wait. Even the most advanced U.S. platforms, like the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers deployed under the U.S. Fifth Fleet, are designed for layered defense, not absolute prevention. Interception is probabilistic, not guaranteed, and that is the gap. Because according to Lloyd's List, April 2026 risk assessment, even a 48-hour disruption in Hormuz would remove up to 30 million barrels from immediate global supply chains. No sinking fleets required, just interruption. And here is the part that reframes everything. Admiral Brad Cooper, commander of U.S. Naval Forces Central Command, stated in a 2025 Pentagon briefing that freedom of navigation operations will continue wherever international law allows. His words, not mine. But freedom of navigation is not the same as freedom from disruption. That is revelation number 1, and we are just getting started. Revelation number 2, and this one nobody saw coming, because before there are warships, before there are missiles, before there are headlines, there are ordinary people moving through ordinary days, inside a system they do not control but completely depend on. The tanker was painted a faded blue, rust along the hull. The crew roster listed 23 names: Filipino, Indian, Pakistani. Average age, 34. At 05:12 a.m. Gulf time, the call came through maritime radio. Unidentified object in water, requesting guidance. No panic, no alarm bells, just procedure. Among the crew was Chief Engineer Muhammad Arif Khan, 41 years old, from Karachi. 2 children, one studying engineering, the other still in school. He had been at sea for 11 consecutive weeks, according to crew rotation logs cited by International Transport Workers Federation, ITF. This is what normal looked like. Then insurance alerts began hitting terminals. Then routing instructions changed. Then captains were told to wait. Engines idle, schedules collapsing. Because when risk classifications shift, when Lloyd's of London Joint War Committee moves an area into high threat, everything downstream freezes. Cargo delays, pay delays, supply chain fractures, no explosion, no impact, but the consequences start immediately. According to Al Jazeera, April 2026, during the 2019 tanker incidents in the same region, over 1,000 seafarers were left stranded at sea for extended periods due to insurance refusals and rerouting confusion. Food supplies tightened, medical access delayed. Let that land, because disruption does not begin with destruction, it begins with hesitation. Now watch how the narrative shifts. Officials say deterrence is holding. They say no confirmed attacks. They say situation under control. He said stable. He did not say secure. That was not an accident. According to BBC Monitoring, April 2, 2026, regional officials deliberately avoided using the word safe in public briefings because safety implies certainty, stability implies temporary balance, and that balance is carried by people like Arif Khan, people who do not set policy, people who cannot leave. If this escalates even slightly, they are the first to absorb it, not in headlines, but in silence. If a system can only function by placing its most vulnerable people directly in the path of its greatest risks, what exactly are we stabilizing? Revelation number 3, and this one is about what is happening to the institution itself, because what you are watching in the Strait of Hormuz is not just a regional crisis, it is a stress fracture inside a system that was designed for dominance, not for disruption. Here is the list. 2018, U.S. withdraws from the Iran nuclear deal. 2019, tanker seizures and attacks spike across the Gulf. 2020, Qasem Soleimani killed. Retaliatory missile strikes follow. 2021, U.S. Navy reports increased harassment incidents in Hormuz. 2022, global energy markets destabilized after Ukraine war shocks supply chains. 2023, Iran accelerates drone and missile proliferation across proxy networks. 2024, Red Sea shipping disruptions force rerouting of global trade. 2025, 17 close contact naval incidents reported by U.S. Fifth Fleet. March 2026, Iran signals Hormuz leverage openly. No pauses, no resets, no structural adaptation, just accumulation. Now add timing. On March 30th, 2026, one day before Iran's statement, multiple senior U.S. officials were publicly emphasizing regional deterrent stability during a State Department press briefing. That is not a punchline. That is a documented fact. Because institutions speak in frameworks, reality moves in pressure, and that gap is widening. Now connect this back. Revelation 1 showed you the physical vulnerability, a choke point that cannot be defended with certainty. Revelation 2 showed you the human layer, people absorbing risk without control. This is the cause behind both. A system optimized for projection, not resilience. Say that again. A system optimized for projection, not resilience. Because when your strategy depends on uninterrupted flow and your adversary only needs interruption, you are no longer in control of the outcome. You are reacting to it. According to Goldman Sachs Global Commodities Outlook, April 2026, even perceived instability in Hormuz introduces pricing distortions that ripple across over $9 trillion in global trade flows. Perceived instability, not actual closure. That is not how you win wars. That is how you lose them. And here is the final layer. These were not reckless decisions. These were not irrational actors. They were operating exactly as the system trained them to operate. These were not disloyal actors. They were loyal to the system. And that is the thing that made the system fragile. Now let us talk about the strategic logic Iran is applying here. It is not trying to defeat the United States Navy. It is trying to make victory irrelevant. This is closer to World War II U-boat strategy than a conventional naval battle, not in technology, but in logic. You do not need to sink every ship. You just need to make shipping unreliable. Uncertainty becomes the weapon. Because each small disruption, a delayed tanker, a rerouted convoy, a spike in insurance, makes the system slightly more fragile, and each layer of fragility makes the next disruption easier to trigger. This is compound collapse theory in motion. Each delay increases cost. Each cost increases hesitation. Each hesitation slows flow. Each slowdown validates the threat, and the cycle feeds itself. Now expand the map. China continues to quietly increase strategic petroleum reserves while avoiding direct confrontation, according to Reuters Energy Desk reporting, April 2026. India is negotiating discounted crude flows from alternative suppliers, reported by Bloomberg Energy. European states, particularly Germany and Italy, are accelerating LNG contingency planning, per IEA briefings, and then there are the silences. No direct military escalation statements from Japan, no emergency naval mobilization announcements from NATO headquarters, no coordinated global response framework announced by the G7. Their silence is the most eloquent statement possible, because they understand the asymmetry. They understand that this is not about defeating a fleet, it is about exhausting a system, like Thermopylae, not because of the battle itself, but because of what the terrain allowed a smaller force to do to a larger one. The choke point is the strategy, and right now the actors who might stabilize this system are recalculating exposure, not projecting power. The guarantors are hesitating, and the entity that can disrupt everything sits exactly where it was, undisturbed, watching. Now let us talk about what this means for you personally, because this is where the story stops being about navies and governments and starts being about ordinary people. If even a partial disruption in the Strait of Hormuz lasts 72 hours, analysts at Goldman Sachs, April 2026 outlook, estimate oil prices could spike by 20% to 30% almost immediately. That translates fast. Petrol prices at the pump, up by Rs 40 to Rs 70 per liter in markets like Pakistan within days, based on historical pass-through rates from the State Bank of Pakistan energy import data. Electricity bills, already under pressure, could rise another 8% to 12% due to fuel adjustment charges. Grocery receipts, transportation costs feed directly into food prices. Expect 5% to 10% increases in staples within weeks. That is not a forecast, that is already in your wallet, because energy is not just one sector, it is the input cost of everything. Now here is the part nobody connects: data centers, AI infrastructure. According to the International Energy Agency, IEA, global data center electricity demand is projected to rise by over 75% by 2030, and a large portion of that energy still depends on fossil fuel stability in regions like the Gulf. So when oil flow becomes uncertain, it does not just hit transport or heating, it touches the digital systems you rely on every day. Streaming slows, cloud costs rise, services become more expensive, downstream, because the global economy is not insulated from Hormuz. It is downstream from it. Your job security, your bills, your cost of living, all of it sits on top of a system that assumes uninterrupted flow through a 33-kilometer corridor. The Strait of Hormuz did not create that vulnerability, it just made it impossible to ignore. There is a genuine counter-argument that requires honest acknowledgement. Presenting only one side is the kind of analysis we criticize in other outlets, and this channel is not going to do that. The argument is simple. The United States Navy remains the most powerful maritime force in human history. It operates 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, over 90 guided missile destroyers and cruisers, and maintains continuous presence in the Gulf through the U.S. Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain, according to Pentagon Force Structure Reports 2025. Fair point. We report it. Freedom of navigation has been enforced for decades. Previous disruptions in Hormuz, including the 1980s tanker war and the 2019 incidents, did not result in long-term closure. That matters. But here is what strategic analysts understand that surface-level confidence misses. Power projection is not the same as system control, because even at peak deployment, the Navy does not escort every tanker. It cannot inspect every threat vector, and it does not eliminate risk, and it manages it. According to Lloyd's List Intelligence 2026, even a perceived threat level increase of one category can reduce tanker traffic by up to 15%, regardless of actual military presence. So yes, the fleet is unmatched, but the system it protects is more fragile than it appears. The question is not whether the U.S. Navy can win a fight. The question is whether it can prevent the kind of disruption that makes winning irrelevant. So where does this leave us? Let me give you two clear paths because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1, contained pressure. This is the managed scenario. For this path to hold, several things must happen in sequence. First, Iran limits its actions to signaling rather than execution. Second, the United States and regional allies maintain continuous naval escort operations without escalation. Third, China and India quietly stabilize demand by increasing alternative sourcing and strategic reserves. Fourth, insurance markets quickly reprice risk downward after no actual closure occurs. If all four align, Hormuz remains open, but under constant tension, a kind of permanent armed normality. Trade continues. Prices stabilize after volatility. No systemic rupture occurs. But even in this scenario, the cost is structural anxiety baked into global shipping. This path is possible. But here's the condition that makes it difficult. It depends on every major actor choosing restraint at the same time, under pressure, indefinitely. Path 2. Slow friction spiral. This is not a collapse in the Hollywood sense. There are no explosions, no dramatic headlines. This is erosion, not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, irreversibly, like water eroding stone. First, insurance premiums remain elevated. Then shipping routes become longer and more expensive. Then tanker availability tightens. Then energy prices stop returning to previous baselines after each spike. And over time, temporary disruption becomes permanent adjustment. Years from now, a future generation will ask, how did they not see it coming? And some did. Analysts at the International Energy Agency, parts of the U.S. Naval War College, and multiple maritime risk firms warned repeatedly that choke point dependence creates systemic fragility, but those warnings were treated as theoretical, not urgent. I think we are closer to Path 2 than the headlines suggest, but I also thought that in early 2024, before the Red Sea disruptions, and then reality shifted faster than models predicted, and that is the point. Here is what I keep coming back to. The Strait of Hormuz is just a narrow stretch of water on a map, but in reality, it behaves more like a pressure valve for the entire global economy, and pressure valves do not announce when they are about to fail. They just hold until they do not. We began with ships moving quietly through a 33-kilometer corridor. No explosions, no war declaration, just movement, hesitation, and silence. But now that image looks different, because that silence was never empty. It was loaded with insurance recalculations, loaded with naval positioning, loaded with decisions being made in real time about what level of risk the world is willing to tolerate. And in that sense, the Strait is not just geography anymore. It is a signal system, a place where global confidence is tested in barrels, dollars, and minutes. This is not a political figure. This is a fire alarm pulled by a system that can see the building's internal wiring beginning to fail, even if the outside still looks intact. The system was never fully stable. It was temporarily cooperating, and that cooperation depends on something fragile, uninterrupted flow through a corridor only a few kilometers wide. So the question is no longer just about Iran, or the United States Navy, or even Hormuz itself. The question is larger now. Can a global system built on constant flow survive when flow becomes conditional? Or is every empire of connectivity always just one choke point away from discovering it was never permanent, only paused? Share this with someone who still thinks Hormuz is just a distant geopolitical headline. It is not. It is a live stress test of the global system that sets the price of everything from fuel to food to freight. And if you understand that, then you understand this is not a regional story. It is a structural one. Now 3 questions, and each one matters for a different reason. Q1. Analytical. If Hormuz experiences only a 48, 72-hour disruption, which system breaks first? Global shipping, insurance pricing, energy supply chains, or military deterrence credibility? Q2. Accountability. When systems repeatedly operate in known choke points with known vulnerabilities, who is responsible for the risk? The actors creating tension, or the institutions that designed dependency on that geography? Q3. Philosophical. Is global stability ever truly stable, or is it always just a temporary agreement between pressures that have not yet collided? If this level of analysis matters to you, subscribe and turn on notifications, because these are the kinds of stories that do not unfold weekly. They unfold in waves, and missing one wave means misunderstanding the next. Like the video if you want more coverage that connects military action to economic consequence in real time. And leave a comment. I read every single one. This channel exists for stories that are not just news, but systems under stress, where geopolitics, economics, and human consequence all collide in the same frame. Stay sharp.